Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Helena, aka No Justice MTG, and I'm joined tonight by Curtis Daly. How are you doing, Curtis?
I'm doing very well. I thought I was hosting for a second because it flashed up on screen. I was like, I'm not prepared. I'm absolutely on top of the world. I'm so glad to be co-hosting with you tonight.
Absolutely. 2 nights in a row. The USA has been in a covert war with Venezuela since September. In that time, lethal force has been used at least 22 times against small vessels off of Venezuela's coast, killing multiple civilian crews. In one case, a so-called double tap strike, alleged to have been ordered by the US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, who is said to have told military officials to, quote, kill everybody, was used to blow up a boat and then kill 2 survivors clinging to a fragment. The Atlantic ran an article on that double tap, including this chilling extract. They were unarmed, incommunicado, and adrift as they repeatedly attempted to right what remained of their boat. At one point, the men raised their arms and seemed to signal to the US aircraft above, a gesture some who watched a video of the incident interpreted as a sign of surrender. Then, a second explosion finished the men off, leaving only a bloody stain on the surface of the sea. Footage of the 2 men's desperate final moments made some viewers nauseated, leading one to nearly vomit. It was worse than we had been led to believe, one person told us. The USA has so far justified its attacks on those vessels by claiming they're engaged in what the White House calls narco-terrorism, apparently escalating the metaphorical war on drugs to full-on combat. But that characterization of the US's assault on Venezuela appeared to be overturned entirely yesterday, when the White House dramatically escalated its undeclared war on the country.
It's been an interesting day from the standpoint of news. As you probably know, we've just seized a tanker on the coast of Venezuela, a large tanker, very large. Largest one ever seized, actually. And other things are happening, so you'll be seeing that later, and you'll be talking about that later with some other people.
That was US President Donald Trump announcing that his military had unilaterally seized a Venezuelan oil tanker off the country's coast. A little later, the Pentagon released footage of the raid. Soldiers were transported to the tanker by helicopter before descending to the deck via ropes and scattering across the ship. As you can see, they were uniformed and operating in teams, their weapons drawn. Military sources told CBS that the helicopters were launched from the US Gerald Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier. The operation involved 2 helicopters, 10 Coast Guard members, and 10 Marines, as well as Special Forces. On CNN, retired US Air Force Colonel Cedric Layton described the operation.
Can you just tell me what you're seeing when you look at this video?
Yeah, Caitlin. So what you're seeing here is basically they're fast roping down from the helicopter onto the deck. This is one of the Maritime Response Forces. These are basically the Coast Guard's version of Special Operations Forces. They have 2 teams, one on the East Coast, another one on the West Coast. This one is the one from the East Coast, and what they're doing here is they're going into where basically the pilot house, where the captain of the ship, the skipper of the ship, is actually steering it, and they take that over first, basically to control the ship. And in this case, the skipper, as the ship is known, is this large oil tanker, and that oil tanker is basically designed to take a large amount of oil from ports in the Middle East to other places. The other thing that's interesting about this ship is it's probably owned by a Russian oligarch. So there's a connection here between the Russian oligarchs and the Iranians, as well as what you see here with Venezuela.
That was pretty much the line from the White House too, with US Attorney General Pam Bondi saying this. Today, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Homeland Security Investigations, and the United States Coast Guard, with support from the Department of War, executed a seizure warrant for a crude oil tanker used to transport sanctioned oil from Venezuela and Iran. For multiple years, the oil tanker has been sanctioned by the United States due to its involvement with an illicit oil shipping network supporting foreign terrorist organizations. This seizure, completed off the coast of Venezuela, was conducted safely and securely, and our investigation alongside the Department of Homeland Security to prevent the transport of sanctioned oil continues. The seized ship, the skipper, was sanctioned by the United States government in 2022, accused of smuggling oil that generated funds for Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. But the Venezuelan government has accused the US of, quote, blatant piracy, going on to say this. Under these circumstances, the true reasons for the prolonged aggression against Venezuela have finally been revealed. It has always been about our natural resources, our oil, our energy, the resources that belong exclusively to the Venezuelan people. The accusation of piracy may have some merits, but the US action on the Venezuelan ship putting me in mind of this from 2023. Those were the scenes from November 2023, when the part Israeli-owned ship Galaxy was hijacked by Houthi forces from Yemen, part of the group's strategy to disrupt Red Sea shipping traffic in protest at Israel's genocide in Gaza. The boarding of the ship was widely decried as piracy, and if it walks like piracy, if it swims like piracy, if it quacks like piracy, well, you know the rest. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has also responded to the US capture of the tanker. At a rally, he called on Venezuela's citizens to, quote, act like warriors and to smash the teeth of the North American empire if necessary. He also did this.
A los ciudadanos estadounidenses que están contra la guerra, les contesto una canción muy famosa. Don't worry, be happy. La 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 la. Don't worry, be happy. La 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 la. Just peace, not war.
Maduro has been in power since 2013, but is widely believed to have stolen last year's presidential election. His opposition, Edmundo Gonzalez, who is believed to have won in 2024, was forced into exile in Spain. He is a member of the Unitary Platform, a coalition of trade unions, civil society groups and political parties. The platform's leader, Maria Corina Machado, has been in hiding in Venezuela for months. But after being awarded this year's Nobel Peace Prize, she has re-emerged, after covertly travelling to Oslo to collect it. In a press conference this morning, she was asked about the seizure of the Venezuelan tanker.
Some people talk about invasion in Venezuela, the threat of an invasion in Venezuela, and I answered, Venezuela has been already invaded. We have the Russian agents, we have the Iranian agents, we have terrorist groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, operating freely in accordance with the regime. We have the Colombian guerrilla, the drug cartels that have taken over 60% of our populations, and not only involved in drug trafficking, but in human trafficking, in networks of prostitution. So this has turned Venezuela into the criminal hub of the Americas. And what sustained the regime is a very powerful and funded, strongly funded repression system. Where does that funds come from? Well, from drug trafficking, from the black market of oil, from arms trafficking, for human trafficking. We need to cut those flows. And once it happens, and repression is weakened, it's over, because that's the only thing the regime has left, violence and terror. So we ask the international community to cut those sources, because the other regimes that support Maduro and the criminal structure are very active and had turned Venezuela into the safe haven for their operations into the rest of Latin America.
The Trump administration has been tacitly pursuing regime change in Venezuela for a while. In August, it put a $50 million bounty on Maduro in exchange for his arrest. As of late last month, there were also 15,000 troops stationed near Venezuela, with 5,000 of them concentrated in Puerto Rico, where a controversial base has been reopened to accommodate them. If you're still wondering what's unfolding around Venezuela, look no further than the Trump administration's new national security strategy document published last week. On the Western Hemisphere, which includes South America, it says this. The Western Hemisphere is home to many strategic resources that America should partner with regional allies to develop, to make neighboring countries as well as our own more prosperous. The United States must be preeminent in the Western Hemisphere as a condition of our security and prosperity, a condition that allows us to assert ourselves confidently where and when we need to in the region. Now, what's interesting, Curtis, is that in the run-up to the national security documents being posted, Pete Hegseth kept talking about how they don't need to engage in utopian idealism and regime change, but this looks a lot like regime change, or at least attempted regime change, doesn't it, Curtis?
Oh, 100%. It's really interesting and important to note that Mercado signs the Caroma Decree back in 2002. And that was a document that kind of emerged one day after the attempted coup. And it talked about ripping up democratic institutions such as the National Assembly, for example. Of course, they wanted a coup, a transition government. What's also interesting is that the coup was reversed after 2 days because there was such strong demonstrations and so many people turned out against it. So Mercado has a long career in being a US puppet, talking about essentially regime change in the open. There was a video clip of Mercado doing an interview with Donald Trump Jr., and she just openly said, let's open up public services, especially oil, to markets. I think she even said foreign markets. Look, one of the big thrusts of the initial attempted coup was the fact that Chavez wanted to share the wealth from oil. So the wealth that came from oil, share it around the country. Of course, he also wanted to nationalize oil, which later happened. So of course, it's very interesting that the US wants to essentially invade them because they're very rich in their resources. In fact, Venezuela holds 18% of the world's oil reserves. 18%, right? And only a fifth. So you can understand why the US want to get their greedy hands all over it. But I think there's almost a new wrinkle in this. The US doesn't seem to want to lie about it anymore. I mean, we once lived in a world where politicians and governments would at least pretend to care about international law, pretend to care about law and order, but it seems like they're not keeping that pretense up. Now, why, may you ask? Some people are like, why are they not really lying and being so open about it? Simply because they can get away with it. I mean, let's talk about Israel for a second. Israel can commit war crimes on a daily basis, can commit genocide. You know, you've got the UN who are very clear about international law. You've got the ICJ, the ICC, multiple human rights organizations condemn Israel, and yet no one stops them. And the US backs them, and the US faces zero consequences. So why do they need to lie when they can get away with it? I mean, the US is still, people talk about the dying empire. The US is still the most powerful country on earth. So no matter with multiple countries and the UN condemning certain actions, they can seem to get away with it. Now, this is no excuse for Maduro, by the way. I just think this is probably something worth noting, is that Maduro is paranoid, right? Let's be very honest. Venezuela isn't the bastion of liberal democracy. It has issues with authoritarianism. But if you're Maduro, who's seen multiple coup attempts over and over again, especially when it comes to Mercado, who was on the same platform as Gonzalez, and Gonzalez was obviously the opposition leader who had to flee, then, you know, from Maduro's perspective, he's going to try and expel them. Again, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but when you've had the US and puppets for the US being so open about regime change, you're going to be paranoid. I also think it's very interesting when it comes to Pete Hegseth. He changed the Department of Defense to Department of War. I mean, it should be called the Department of War Crimes. And you don't have to look too far back. Before the election, when you had Donald Trump and people around him say, we are going to be a peaceful administration, right? I'm the president of peace. We're not going to toe the Western foreign policy orthodoxy of more wars. We're going to reject all of that. And then as soon as they got into office, they completely U-turned. But they've done more than that. Not only have they U-turned and stuck to the status quo of foreign policy, they've got in overdrive and now posting videos. I mean, that video of the Navy SEALs taking the oil tanker, which is obviously akin to the Houthis. You've got Pete Hegseth himself and the US administration sharing AI videos of them breaking international law. Or when it comes to ICE, I know ICE is domestic, but still, nonetheless, they are so open about it. And I think they don't care anymore because they can get away with it. I also think there's potentially another thing here as well. I think we understand that there's a global realignment happening. And I think the US is very threatened by China. Now, a lot of people seem to think that the US is on the way out. I'm not sure if that's the case just yet. I mean, remember, we rely on their payment services, for example. The tech industry in America is really strong. They are still an economic powerhouse and they are still the most powerful country in the world. But I do think that they're looking at potential global realignment and think, do you know what? Maybe we need to go back to hard power. Now, of course, it's not like the West or the US has ever left hard power. They've kind of still kept onto it. But the world has tried to move into soft power, trying to influence people based or countries based on trade deals or be more aggressive on sanctions. But I think the US are almost worried that they're losing their own power, that they've just gone into overdrive and thought, you know what, we're going to be open about basically global domination. Now, that sounds like a cartoon character sort of description, but it's true. I mean, there was leaked documents from the US in which the documents talked about wanting certain countries to quit the EU to make Europe great again. It's clear that they want to dominate Europe. I know on your show with Aaron and Michael last week talked about how Donald Trump hates Europe. He certainly does, but I think he also wants to come after Europe and take over it as well.
Speaking of global realignment, how has the United States' favourite vassal state responded to the US simply helping itself to another country's vessel in international waters? With complete silence, obviously, as far as the government is concerned. One MP has, however, tried to get a statement from Keir Starmer's ministers today.
Doesn't the minister think response from the government is extraordinarily low-key, acquiescent to a declaration by the US that it gives itself the right to interfere in the internal affairs of any country around the world that it thinks it doesn't agree with? This is an extraordinary state of affairs. And will she make any comment on what is actually an act of piracy by the US in the Caribbean by seizing an oil tanker and taking it into its custody with no basis in international law for that action, no basis of any kind of military threat to the United States being made, and it seems to me to be wholly illegal within international law? Minister.
I thank the Right Honourable Member, and he will have heard me say that whilst it is ultimately for the US to decide their own strategy, that there are parts of it that we disagree with. And it is important that as we respect the US as a democracy, friends and allies should respect each other's choices.
MPs have been much more concerned about the Trump administration's new national security strategy section on Europe. There, it talks about Europe's civilization erasure and pledges to put the weight of Washington behind what it describes as patriotic parties in the bloc. This means right-wing populist parties, of course. Ministers have said almost nothing about this explicit plan to interfere in European elections, potentially including our own. But in a Commons debate this morning, a handful of MPs tried to hold the government to account.
Last weekend, the US administration published its national security strategy, and it is the clearest articulation yet of President Trump's ideological foundation. The whole House should be under no illusion. The United States consensus that has led the Western world since the Second World War appears shattered. It refers to Europe facing, and I quote, civilizational erasure, and it will be unrecognizable in 20 years. It vows to, and I quote again, to help Europe correct its current trajectory and promote patriotic European parties. The prospect of United States interference in the democratic politics of Europe, I believe, is chilling. The President's comments on Tuesday further demonstrate this. He called European leaders weak and singled out one of the United Kingdom's mayors as, and I quote, horrible, vicious and disgusting. But sometimes, Mr. Speaker, what is not said is as important as is what is said. In this case, the absence of condemnation for Russia is extraordinary, though not surprising. Given certain UK dependencies on the United States, this leaves the United Kingdom especially vulnerable.
I don't think we should tiptoe around this issue. The section on Europe talks of civilizational erasure. It says that the continent will be unrecognisable in 20 years. They say that they want Europe to remain European, and that within a few decades NATO members will be majority non-European. I think we need to recognise this for what it is. It's a document rooted in racist, white supremacist ideology, and it should be called out accordingly.
The United States' new national security strategy was smuggled out in the middle of the night, which is fitting for such a bleak and dystopian vision of the world. In it, there's some very sharp criticism of European allies, including our internal democratic processes, and a prioritisation of future interference in European democratic processes to promote a specific ideology and worldview. So what is the government going to do to protect the integrity of British democratic processes from a president who has a track record of denying democratic outcomes in his own country?
So when it comes to Trump's national security strategy, those MPs had plenty of concerns around Washington's ideas that they want to back so-called patriotic parties within Europe. Obviously, that means openly right-wing populist parties in Europe, very, very specifically. The minister's answer to those concerns, sadly, was pretty much nothing, given the fact that Keir Starmer couldn't even mount a really good defence of his own Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, when he was attacked by Trump as well, because there seems to be no fight back when it comes to Trump's forays into European politics from this government. Curtis, this doesn't seem like we have a particularly strong response to the US's newfound belligerence. What's your take?
Okay, let's take Keir Starmer for a second. Keir Starmer's strategy has to be to suck up to Donald Trump. That much is clear, and it was absolutely sickening and disappointing to see that he didn't mount a strong defence than Sadiq Khan. I mean, I have a lot of issues with Sadiq Khan, but one thing I don't have an issue with is the fact that he's a Muslim, and yet clearly many people on the right wing, clearly people around Donald Trump, take issue with the fact that he's a Muslim, and they try and say that London is turning into Londonstan. People who've never been to London saying it's a shithole. Look, I've been to London many times, and I think it's a wonderful place. Maybe a bit too busy for me, but I do think it's wonderful. I do want to sort of jump on about the sort of national security thing, or the plan from Trump. I think that Donald Trump is less ideological than those around him, namely Pete Hegseth and Stephen Miller. Now, of course, Trump is malleable in a way. I mean, I remember back to the 2016 election in America, and there were trans flags behind Donald Trump at rallies saying trans people for Trump, and he was celebrating it. Far cry from that. And of course, did that mean he cared about these people? Of course he didn't. So I think he is someone who's malleable. He's more interested in power and enriching himself. But the people behind him, especially Stephen Miller, are ideological. And just how I talked about that, the leaked US document talked about wanting certain nations to pull out of the EU. They also want to support far-right political parties. Now, for Trump, it's more about, once again, imperialism, domination, and power. But for those behind him, well, they want that too, of course, but they also want to bolster far-right parties because they just agree with it. They agree with ethno-nationalism. So for Trump, that works hand in hand. He can campaign on far-right fascist talking points. He's governing like a fascist. I wholeheartedly believe that, by the way. And, political parties across Europe are going to have a stronger relationship with him. When it comes to the UK, Nigel Farage, for example, they have a pretty good relationship. We can debate on whether Farage is a fascist or not, maybe another time. But if Farage were to be Prime Minister and Trump somehow gets a third term, what you've got is essentially the UK being even more of a vassal state and selling out the working class of this country to foreign oligarchs. So basically, I think there's two things at play here. You've got the oligarch trying to dominate the world because the US wants the control of the UK, which the UK is happy to give up, and Europe. And the other thing at play is ideology, in which I don't think Trump is as much into fascism as people around him are.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point there. And the thing is that it's clear from the tariff policy, which is being used obviously to reshape geopolitics, not actually bringing manufacturing back to the United States, that has massively dropped off the face of the earth since they cancelled all of the industrial policy from the Inflation Reduction Act. That is a way of trying to reshape the global order through trade belligerence, right? Obviously, they're using plenty of military belligerence in other countries in the global south as well. And it's clear from the relationship there that having a UK that's split off from the rest of Europe and a UK that is totally subservient to the US's needs means we are part of that vassal state arrangement. There'll be other kind of ancillary states that are kind of in the periphery of the US hegemony, and then there'll be enemies as well. That's the kind of framework that they're looking towards. And so to ensure that we maintain our position as part of the special relationship, they need to make sure that we're as obsequious as possible.
Will you abolish the House of Lords, and will it be in your first term? Yes, we do want to abolish the House of Lords. I don't think anybody can defend the House of Lords.
This has been rewarding cronies, and that's just not on. And Keir Starmer would never do that. He would never exploit the honour system to do what Boris Johnson has done.
Keir Starmer said, "I will abolish the House of Lords to restore trust in politics." 2 years later, he appoints 30 new peers to the House of Lords. What changed in that time?
Well, we're taking real steps to reform and bring about big changes.
No, but he said he'd abolish it. He said he would abolish it.
Look, we remain committed to a big change in the House of Lords in the future. Absolutely.
That was Keir Starmer, former MP and now peer Thangam Debboner, and new Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Lucy Powell, all flexing their moral muscles over Starmer's promises of House of Lords reform. Now, I have no idea what big changes Lucy Powell had in mind there, but I doubt the LBC audience expected it would be doing a Boris Johnson and stuffing the House of Lords with Labour apparatchiks. Except that's what he's now done, stacking the Lords with 25 new Labour peers, among them former advisers to both Starmer and the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, in a move Labour says was needed to balance the upper house. Just a reminder that this was in the 2024 Labour manifesto. We will reform the appointments process to ensure the quality of new appointments and will seek to improve the national and regional balance of the second chamber. Labour is committed to replacing the House of Lords with an alternative second chamber that is more representative of the regions and nations. Great idea. Reform the House of Lords by making it more Labour, abolish it by growing it. And Starmer really is growing it at record pace, having installed 62 new Lords since last December. So who are the new lords and ladies ennobled by Keir Starmer? This is from The Guardian. Matthew Doyle, a former number 10 Director of Communications, and Katie Martin, a former Chief of Staff to Rachel Reeves, will be among those appointed to the Upper House in a move first reported by The Guardian. Carol Linforth, a former Labour Party Chief of Staff for Operations, and Richard Walker, the Executive Chair of Iceland, who switched from supporting the Tories before the 2024 election, will also receive peerages. Others on Labour's list include Michael Barber, a Whitehall veteran who led Tony Blair's delivery unit and now advises Starmer, and Len Duvall, the chair of the London Assembly. Asked to explain the explosion of Labour Lords, a party source said this: "The Tories stuffed the House of Lords, creating a serious imbalance that has allowed them to frustrate our plans to make working families better off. This needs to be corrected to deliver on our mandate for the British people. We will continue to progress our programme of reform, which includes removing the right of hereditary peers to sit and vote in the House of Lords." There have been some interesting peerage choices from other parties too. Tory leader Kemi Badenoch nominated 3 new peers. And a sign that culture wars continuing to be all she has, she's nominated Olympic swimmer Sharon Davies. Davies has repeatedly clashed with trans women over her views on gender-neutral bathrooms in women's sports, though the former athlete denies that she is in any way anti-trans. She is bizarrely pretty anti-drag, though. In April, she criticised the BBC's reporting of the sudden death of Drag Race star Jiggly Caliente, so complaining of endless drag stories. In a much earlier and quickly deleted tweet, Davies also said this: "Am I the only person fed up of drag shows? A parody of what a real woman is, like blackface. Women are juggling kids, rushing out a wholesome dinner, doing the laundry and cleaning, and holding down a job, all with period pains and leaky boobs if breastfeeding. Enough of the stereotypes." That earned a smackdown from TV host Lorraine Kelly. "Oh, Sharon, you can't underestimate the power of drag and how it empowers people who often feel like outsiders. They can find their family, grow in confidence, learn to love themselves and be who they really are. It can literally save lives, and it's such a lot of fun." Also nominated by the Tories is Telegraph columnist Simon Heffer. Here's one of his more notable performances from the summer of 2019.
It's appalling for this country that if we do have a general election at the moment, we're going to face a choice between Coco the Clown's degenerate younger brother and a man who wants to reopen Auschwitz. I mean, this is just terrible.
No, I can't let you get away with that. You cannot say that.
You can't say that.
But I mean, why has he turned a blind eye to all these rabid anti-Semites in his house?
Hang on,
you cannot say that the leader of the Labour Party, whatever you think of him, would intend to do that. That really is.
I'm sure in 1933 they had similar conversations in Germany.
Curtis. These all seem like some very interesting appointments, although it is funny to me how the Labour Party are going with what gets them the most kind of political sway in terms of their friends and apparatchiks, and the Tories have gone for culture warriors. What do you make of it?
Well, first of all, the Green Party want to abolish the House of Lords, and I've seen some people debate on whether they should have peers, and they obviously do. I have no issue with that. I don't think it's hypocritical. They just are trying to advance the power they have. They don't have the power to change the system. The Labour Party, however, it is completely hypocritical because before the election, as you've just shown through various clips, Keir Starmer said, I'm going to abolish the House of Lords. And then what happens? He gets elected and he does another U-turn. So I actually think when it comes to most people, I'm not sure if they really care that much about the House of Lords. Maybe it's just for us political nerds to enjoy. But I think outside of that, people care more about their material conditions, which is why when it comes to taxes and that U-turn, that was far more impactful. And I think I get it because I care more about the material conditions of myself and other people than the House of Lords. In fact, I mean, it's not a vote loser for me. I would like to see the House of Lords abolished and replaced with an elected chamber. But if it wouldn't stop me from voting for a political party, if they said, we're going to keep the House of Lords, but we're going to introduce radical social democracy. But I think it being the House of Lords is immaterial. All it does is add another example of how Keir Starmer is a liar and can't be trusted. So even though people, I don't think on large are really focusing on the ins and outs of who's been put in the House of Lords and which peer is this and that, they care about the fact that, once again, Keir Starmer has been seen to be a liar. And again, it's not necessarily the policy, it's the politics of it. And you can forgive people by thinking he's a liar. I mean, I'm starting to think he's a pathological liar, and I don't think I'm wrong in saying that. When it comes to specific people within the Lords, though, I mean, you're right, they've stuffed them full of culture warriors because that's all the right wing really have these days. Especially given the fact that when it comes to people's material conditions getting worse, when it comes to the fact that we had 15 years of austerity, people have seen that the right wing don't offer any solutions when it comes to people's material needs. So, of course, culture is what rules the day. I think with Keir Starmer, though, the only consistency is a lack of consistency. And I guess in a way that's kind of predictable for Keir Starmer because we know he's going to lie on something. I don't understand why beforehand he didn't say we're just going to change the House of Lords or reform it. Why? Because he made quite a big deal in abolishing the House of Lords because he sort of painted himself into the corner. Whereas if he said, I'm just going to change the House of Lords, it gives him a bit more manoeuvre to sort of get out of it. Although having said that, knowing Keir Starmer, he probably said, we're going to change the House of Lords and then do what he does now, which is not change it whatsoever. So it speaks once again to the bad politicking of Keir Starmer. And there's look, if he was better at politics, even the worst aspects or how he's perceived anyway, the worst aspects of this government, say taxes, for example, could be ameliorated. Had they, before the election, campaigned on increasing taxes, especially on the wealthy, had they said, we're going to introduce a wealth tax, then they get into government and they do exactly that. All the right-wing pundits and right-wing media and GB News can moan forever, but they can say, the British people voted for us, they voted for wealth taxes, for example, and we're going to do it. It's not even policy, it's the way it is, the way it's communicated and the way it is executed. So I think that's just sums up Keir Starmer's leadership. I did want to quickly say something about Simon Heffer. I mean, I haven't seen that video for a while. Really astonishing video. Disgusting. I mean, look, being on the left, speaking out against genocide, speaking up for Palestinian people, gets you smeared as an anti-Semite. There's an entire industry of anti-Semitism weaponization. We all know that to be true, right? But that to me is like the pinnacle of an anti-Semitic smear. And Jeremy Corbyn is one of the few people who have received the most horrific anti-Semitic smears. To say that Jeremy Corbyn was going to reopen Auschwitz is absolutely insane and deluded. Do you know what? The Tories have no decency. They wouldn't look at that and go, do you know what? We very much disagree with left-wing politics. We very much disagree with Jeremy Corbyn. I don't think it's wise to have Simon Heffer as one of our peers, given that he made up a disgusting lie. They don't care about any of that. And that video just gives me chills every single time I see it.
When it comes to Keir Starmer and the manifesto, you're right. Like, if they've just put these things in the manifesto and then delivered upon them, like the things that they've done that people don't like that weren't in the manifesto, the press wouldn't be able to say anything. The reality is that in a lot of cases, they have had basically what looks to me like a shadow manifesto of policies, like things like digital ID that they're just ramming through and trying to get people to vote for, despite the fact that when it came to the actual election, it was radio silence, right? And the thing is if you have something in your manifesto, you actually can't get blocked by the Lords forever because of the Salisbury Convention. You can use the Parliament Act to ram it through the Lords without them being able to block it forever. And so them saying, well, we can't get through our workers' rights legislation because of the Lords, right? We can't do all of our manifesto pledges because of the Lords. Well, you can. Those are definitively the things that you can do despite the House of Lords. But things that you want to pass, legislation that you want to pass that wasn't in a manifesto, that doesn't have popular consent as decided on by the electorate through the electoral process, those things the Lords can hold up forever. And unless you have a majority, unless you can corral enough support in that house, you can't force these things through unless you go to the electorate. So why else do you think, in my opinion, that Keir Starmer and Labour would want to have a bigger, kind of larger cohort of Labour MPs, if not to be able to pass more legislation that they cannot pass using the Salisbury Convention by invoking the Parliament Act? Because again, there's plenty of things that they want to do that there's no popular support for and no public consent for at the ballot box. Something to think about. Nigel Farage has found some supporters in unlikely places. Rod Stewart, Holly Valance, and the owner of Flamingo Land all come to mind. But this might be the most surprising endorsement yet. It's from content creator Bonnie Blue, and what's even more surprising is the fact that it's come in an article she wrote in The Spectator of all places. Blue writes this: I am not knowledgeable about politics, but I do know the UK is very messed up. The tax system is terrible, and it's smart to leave if you have money. There are too many people here, we are too accommodating, and it is causing problems. You shouldn't have to pay any inheritance tax, as you've already paid tax on that money. When my granddad died, it was particularly sad because he was too young for my grandma to receive his pension. That's disgusting. Reform has sensible positions on immigration and inheritance tax, so I stand with Nigel Farage. Now, whilst it certainly is curious as to why a hardline conservative newspaper would choose to platform someone like Bonnie Blue, there's a good reason why someone like her might move to the right, and it's not just about immigration. The other reason she mentioned in her article was her opposition to inheritance tax. That's one of the least popular taxes in the country, and exposes a growing rift amongst those who work in the gig economy, especially in something like sex work, where the pay disparity between the haves and the have-nots is vast. Bonnie Blue, for example, claims to earn around $1 million a month on Fansly, having been banned from the more infamous platform OnlyFans due to her nature of her content. With such gargantuan levels of revenue, and as someone working self-employed, she's ripe to be wooed by the low-tax vision that Farage advocates for. Most people will be used to most sex workers being pretty left-wing for plenty of cultural and economic reasons. But just like the rest of society, there is still a 1%, and as pointed out by businessman Matthew Ball, where he broke down the numbers of the economics of OnlyFans. Mathematically, the average OnlyFans creator grosses roughly $1,800 a month annually, of which $1,450 nets to the creator. But according to data previously displayed on OnlyFans' internal creator dashboards, creators in the top 0.1% collect 15 times as much as the average creator in the top 1%, and 100 times that of those in the top 10%. The multiple versus those in the rest of the distribution was not shared, but is likely to be in thousands and tens of thousands. It's something that doesn't get talked about that much. We're too used to talking about the bottom end of the gig economy and not the top. But there is a point at which a precarious gig worker becomes the aspirational petite bourgeois, and it's those kinds of self-employed people who make a big chunk of Reform's electoral cohort. It's Thatcher's dream come to life, an atomised society where everyone is their own boss, but only the richest can afford to act like it, as worker protections are eroded. The sex workers' union movement is growing, but when the world's biggest creators are so far removed from the needs of the many, it could be difficult to bridge that material divide, when, as we can see, the 1% have the potential to be more concerned with their marginal tax rates and how much of their fortune they'll be able to pass on. Now, it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention that Bonnie Blue herself is currently set to be deported from Indonesia after having violated her visa privileges. That follows her arrest by officials under suspicion of having broken local morality laws by filming pornographic content. The police, however, found no evidence that such content had been filmed, but they'll be deporting her anyway for having filmed adjacent content on a tourist visa rather than a work visa. Bali's immigration chief said that the activities they carried out contained pornographic elements, whereas here in Bali we expect tourists who come to support local culture and uphold local wisdom. Weird that someone who won't respect a host nation's culture seems so set on supporting Reform UK, huh? Well, regardless, early today I spoke to Luna, a sex worker and advocate, to look into the dynamics of sex work. I started out by asking them whether or not they thought that Bonnie Blue's politics was shared by other high earners in the industry.
No, I think predominantly sex workers that have worked their way to being like well known or high earning, which can be two completely different things, have a lot more solidarity with the community than someone like Bonnie. You often see sex workers creating crowdfunders for each other. I'm regularly sharing them on my story as well. There is a big, large sense of community and because sex work is so diverse as well, you have people from all walks of life. You have, migrant workers, and you have like workers from here, and you have workers that are like, I don't like to use the word privilege, but I would in this case say privilege, like they haven't had to enter this work. Like maybe they've got a law degree and they decided, I don't want to do this anymore and I'm going to do sex work. And that's a great and valid choice. And there are people that, have come here for on the boats for a better option, and their better option is to do sex work. And whilst it might not be something they picked, it's something that they're choosing to do. And you come into contact with all different types of people doing all different types of work. Like I know I'm in group chats with people where my rate is twice theirs, and I know I'm also in group chats where their rate is 5 times mine. And a lot of that is like down to their hard work, but a lot of it is also due to the fact that there are many workers, especially in the cost of living crisis that we're in, that are working to get and stay out of poverty, or just to be able to exist in poverty when jobs are getting harder and the price of everything's getting more expensive. And people like Bonnie really are in the minority, because being in sex work, you learn about all of this and you can't not want to help. I think for most of us, we all started somewhere. Like there are very few of us that went in their first month, it was like bang, 50 grand. I think my first month on OnlyFans was £54 or something. And now it's not that, because I've been doing it for 7 years. But I would definitely say that acting in your best interest, or at least very publicly acting in your best interest, is quite uncommon and in some senses uncouth in the sex work industry.
Is there any example of anyone high profile that you can mention who's done something that is kind of contrary to what we've seen from Bonnie Blue here?
Sophie Anderson, who passed away, I think, 2 years ago now, was very well known in the sex work community for just being a lovely person, donating her earnings, sharing GoFundMes, being very vocal about LGBTQ plus rights and sex worker rights, trying to challenge the stigma that like someone that has big fake lips and big fake tits and, does sex work is actually one of the kindest, loveliest people you've ever met. I think Rebecca Goodwin does a lot for the general community of people that have the, like single mums and people that were in poverty, like she was before she came up through sex work. And I can think of countless people that I follow and engage with on TikTok that are constantly talking about countries and legislations and all things like that have no reflection on their ability to earn or work safely, because they want us all to be safe. I think most sex workers have a very giving nature. But yeah, I think a lot of people at the top do a lot, give back to people.
One other aspect of this story that I've seen, especially with comments on social media, a lot of the response has been quite classist, in my opinion. Bonnie Blue is not from a wealthy background. She grew up in Derbyshire. And given the stigma around sex work, a lot of people have used that to denigrate the whole industry by implying that it is that lower class that means that she votes for Reform UK rather than some other personal reason. What do you make of that response?
I think that it's always going to be a double-edged sword if you are a sex worker who has grown up poor, because you are punished and viewed as less than and less intelligent and all these things for being poor. And then when you do whatever you can, make every headline that you can, think of, even if it's not for the most positive stuff, to pull yourself out of poverty, and you're still viewed as this poor person who would vote Reform because they're poor, whilst also being viewed as a morally bankrupt woman, even by members in the community. I think that it's unhelpful to the conversation. And I think that people who vote reform because they want to vote reform. There's a lot of nuance around it. There will be some people that are poor and disenfranchised and looking for someone to blame and want to listen to the people that are telling them to blame. And that appears to be reform. That's all Jerry and his pals talk about at the pub. But there will also be very rich, intelligent people that are voting reform. And I think it's very important to note that her being a sex worker in my eyes has very little to do with her voting reform, as does her growing up poor, and what has the most to do about it is her own self-interest.
Natalie Fleet is the Labour MP for Bolsover, one of the 2024 intake. She's also one of the very few Labour MPs to get through Morgan McSweeney's closely monitored selection process, having a background that actually befits a party of the working class. From a coal mining family, Fleet spent her career working in the trade unions, something that precious few of the modern professional class PLP members can say. And luckily with that comes the ability to speak her mind, which she did in a recent podcast interview with Ollie Dugmore for the New Statesman. Here's what she had to say about life on Keir Starmer's backbenches.
And I came in, and there's so much. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it.
You can say it. I know, you can say it.
There's so much small dick energy. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? There's so much. The briefings, the nonsense. And there is a country that is desperate for us to deliver, that's trying to buy Christmas presents and having to pull back and don't know, do they buy the Christmas present for their baby that they really want to, or is that going to put them into their overdraft, or are they already in their overdraft and they can't afford it? I went to my hairdresser this week and she told me she's had the slowest November she's ever had. This cost of living crisis is being felt across this entire country, and we're doing something about it. Special educational needs kids are being let down in my area by the newly elected Reform Council, because the Tories had created such a special educational needs crisis before that. There is so many issues when you look at constituents that can't get appointments or are left on the floor waiting for 14 hours, waiting for an ambulance. We are tackling the NHS. We are doing so much to sort the cost of living. We are making our country a place that you can be proud to live in and raise your children in again. We're making sure that children, our young people, I'm talking about my adult children, if they rent, they can be protected while they do so, and they might even be able to buy. We are a country of hope and aspiration, and I get that my constituents are frustrated and I'm frustrated, and I get why the Parliamentary Labour Party is frustrated too. I get why the journalists are all over it. It must be great for you. I mean, the stories just write themselves. Whether we're replacing the Prime Minister or not, is, these stories, the sources must come to you. It's like an open talk. Who's it going to be? And then you've got like think tanks having polls all about it. All I ever think is of those children in my community, the next generation of Natalies that are scared and they're cold, and they need a government that delivers for them, and not a government that is only ever interested in playing games and getting one over the other.
Whilst I would doubt the veracity of the claim that they're somehow bringing the changes that are needed to fix the cost of living crisis, I understand her point of view. I certainly do. But when it comes to the idea, well, this current government only cared about getting one over on other people, I'm like, well, that was kind of the whole plan from the start. That was literally the whole plan from the start. The game started in the background with Labour together in 2017, trying to get one over on Jeremy Corbyn and the left of the Labour Party. Essentially, from what we'd seen from the internal discussions there, trying to make sure that Jeremy Corbyn never became Prime Minister, to create what you say, a country that works for the poorest in society, that works for the people who need a government that's there to tackle cost of living, to tackle inequality, and to tackle these problems. And whilst it's fine to be frustrated at what's happening at the top, you could have said something before now. Plenty of the PLP currently stayed quiet in the recesses of the period in opposition, when we knew what was happening internally, when what we have seen from people basically admit openly that there was no plan, no policy platform in place during the time when they were in opposition, because they thought they had 2 terms. They thought it'd be 1 term, get rid of the Corbynites, expel the Trots, shake off the fleas, And then the other 5 years in opposition, they build actually write some policies. And now they're in government. And first of all, they don't really have, as far as I can see, a real kind of structural program of real meaningful change to deal with the issues of this country of 15 years of conservative austerity. And on top of this, right, well, that's just the reality of the kind of faction in control of the party at the moment. It's the nest of vipers. These are people who are obsessed with winning for winning's sake. As far as I can see, Keir Starmer's only driving ambition is to be Prime Minister to be Prime Minister. When it comes to the people he surrounds himself with a cadre of people whose only concern is trying to get one over on people, trying to chase the next headline, and try and do whatever's best for the spin doctors and to keep journalists in the lobby on side, rather than what's best for the country. Because if they were trying to do the latter, clearly from what I can see, they've not done a very good job. Curtis, what do you make of her sentiments there?
I will even extend what you were saying about Jeremy Corbyn getting a one-up over him. And when you look at the 2024 election, I mean, what was the pitch from Keir Starmer and the Labour Party? The pitch was, we're not going to fundamentally change anything. We're not going to radically change policy. We just want to manage the government better. So they were kind of playing politics by that rule of just basically saying, these guys are rubbish. These guys are incompetent. We can do a better job. And I think that feeds into the same narrative because they weren't there for change, despite the fact that Keir Starmer on the manifesto cover had his face and change all over it. It's pretty much been anything but. You're absolutely right when it comes to the politicking around Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney, the way they treat not just Jeremy Corbyn, but the entirety of the left. And I think it was Maureen Glassman who admitted on BBC after he smeared Jeremy Corbyn, admitted on TV that yes, like the first sort of 5 years in opposition was to get rid of the left, fundamentally make the party undemocratic, get rid of any sort of power from the membership, which they've largely done. And yes, the second 5 years in opposition was coming up with policies. Now, to me, that's utterly insane. The entire point of being in a political party, the entire point of wanting to be in government is to enact policies to make change. But that was seconds in terms of priorities. That wasn't their priority for Morgan McSweeney and Keir Starmer. It was destroying the left. And of course, when it comes to Keir Starmer, his position is untenable now. He's probably going to be replaced by Wes Streeting, and the circus continues going. Let's take Fleet's comments. I mean, I kind of agree and disagree. I mean, first of all, Fleet, I think, is probably one of the least worst Labour MPs. She's slightly of the better cohort compared to those at the top of the party. It's worth noting that she has always been against the two-child benefit cap. However, that's a bloody low bar, isn't it? To be against the two-child benefit cap. I mean, so bad that even Rachel Reeves has now scrapped it and saying, look how good we are. So it's not a high bar. But I don't think she's like one of the actual worst. But I do think her criticism of small dick energy falls a little bit flat. Now, where I agree, yes, most people in parliaments have small dick energy. And the reason why I say that is because I think small dick energy is cozying up to corporations. I call them being bitches for capital. Cozying up to the US and the Washington lobby and the Israeli lobby and not standing up to ethnic cleansing and genocide. That's small dick energy. Big dick energy is to say, I don't care how much these big businesses and corporations have given money to the Labour Party. We are going to raise taxes on the rich. We are going to bring in a wealth tax. We are going to stand up against power and deliver policies that help the working class of this country. That's big dick energy. Big dick energy is saying, screw the US and their failed foreign policy. Screw Israel. We're no longer going to supply arms to them. We're no longer going to provide a cover for their genocide. We're not going to dilly-dally and make excuses. That's big dick energy. And the problem I have with a Labour MP saying this, even though I do think she's probably slightly better than some of the other cohort, the problem I have with a Labour MP saying this is the fact that when it comes to economic policy, Conservatives, the Labour Party now Reform, pretty much endorse the same neoliberal orthodoxy. Now, of course, the Labour Party want to steal Keir Starmer's line, want to put sticking plaster all over it, which is funny because the entire point of Keir Starmer saying, I don't endorse sticking plaster politics. They want to tinker around the edges. They don't want to fundamentally change the political and economic system. And I think the fact that the Labour Party for decades, apart from a 4-year period between 2015 and 2019, largely endorsed that message. That's small dick energy. When it comes to foreign policy, It is the complete uni party. There is no delineation when it comes to foreign policy between the Conservatives and the Labour Party. And I think completely agreeing on that is also small dick energy. So I definitely agree that the theatrics of politics is kind of pathetic, but that is the political system we kind of live in. I do agree with her sentiment, but I think her analysis isn't deep enough. She just looks at the theatrics of politics and goes, oh, this is just men in their stupid game, when it goes deeper than that. It goes to our political, economic and foreign policy, which I think Labour largely subscribed to. So I think that criticism of hers falls a little bit flat.
Yeah, they always talked about tough choices in the run-up to the election and afterwards when, well, no, you took the easy way out by not standing up to these people, by not standing up to the press, by implementing Leveson 2, for example. Those people they could stand up to, and they just didn't. But I agree with you. I think Natalie Fleet is definitely one of the better Labour MPs. I'm certainly glad that we had an actual working-class trade unionist as a Labour MP and not just another London lawyer or whatever. It's a good thing. And she's someone from the area that represents her own constituency. I just think that it's misplaced to have such confidence in the current platform that the Labour Party are pushing through. Now, that clip I just played was from a much longer interview that's well worth watching. She had some very serious and compelling points to make about the criminal justice system and violence against women and girls, all from Fleet's own perspective as a teenage grooming victim who's had to fight hard to get to where she is. On that subject, she passed scathing judgment on Conservative Party leader and former Minister for Women and Equalities, Kemi Badenoch.
What makes me angry is when people that have never cared about it weaponise it. So, in the last Parliament, Kemi Badenoch did not meet a single grooming gang. Now she uses grooming victims as human shields. They sit alongside her at press conferences. She was Minister for Children and Women and Equalities. She had the power to do something about it. She had the platform and she did nothing. She didn't speak about it in Parliament. She didn't tackle this issue.
I mean, she's not wrong, is she? She's not wrong that Kemi Badenoch didn't spend any time talking about this and seemed like she kind of ignored her Women and Equalities brief as far as I can see, because she was also Business and Trade Secretary at the time. As far as I can see, the only thing that she actually did in her role as Women and Equalities Minister, at a time in which we continually seen a failure on the part of the state to deal with violence against women and girls, she was busy spending time forcing the Financial Conduct Authority to be less trans-inclusive, or stuffing the Equality and Human Rights Commission with anti-trans people to satisfy her weird obsession with us, right? When there was actual real problems affecting women and girls in this country, she was obsessing about trans people because she gets all of her politics from Twitter rather than taking her ministerial brief seriously. And that's the reality of Conservative governance. Thank you, Curtis, for joining me tonight. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Oh, thank you so much. I love tonight. A lot of fun. And hopefully we'll do it again soon.
As always, come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.